And welcome to episode 129 of the PowerScore LSAT podcast. I'm Dave Kaloran in Napa Valley.
And this is Jon Dinning in Los Angeles.
John, how are you feeling today?
I feel all right. Although, I realize as we say this intro in every episode that we're just still in the same places each time. Getting a little sick of that.
You want to do some traveling?
I think we ought to mix it up.
It is definitely coming this summer. I'm getting out of California for at least a little bit. I guarantee that.
Well, take me with you or let me house crash while you're gone.
Either works for me.
I know you've got a preference, which is not to leave me in your home alone.
Yeah, I leave the doors locked.
I know where the booze is.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of it. So, speaking of which, what are you drinking today?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's that time of year. Anybody who knows me at all will know that this is Masters Week. And while I'm not able to go this year like I was last year, I do have it on my mind. Tomorrow is the first day of the Masters. It's my mother's birthday. And so in honor of both of those things, I'm going to do something she would not approve of. I'm drinking a John Daly, which is the old classic Arnold Palmer, the most like stereotypical Masters drink, but you spike it with vodka. Half lemonade, half tea, and vodka.
Are you wearing some of those John Daly pants that he's been sporting recently?
Well, not recently, man. He's been rocking those since the 90s.
Recently to me.
Yeah, I don't know that I've got anything quite that flair-filled, but I respect him for it. He'll go out and play barefoot with a cigarette in those pants and shoot a 73.
I like how you say it's flair when I would have just said it's gaudy and cheap, but, you know, different people.
Yeah, well, he's a style icon in my book, Dave. Say what you want.
He's an icon. I don't know if he's a style icon.
All right, then. Since you're so proper today, what are you drinking?
Well, in the spirit of the theme of this podcast, which is about the LSAT resuming in-person testing while keeping at-home testing, I've gone for the duality theme. Okay. So I've gone with the Black and Tan, featuring Sierra Nevada Pale Ale as the base with Guinness poured over the top of it. Although I will warn you, John, the next time you go to Ireland, do not order a Black and Tan. Call it a half and half.
Interesting. I've never ordered either in Ireland, but good note.
Also, don't order an Irish car bomb.
At least, not in Belfast.
Pretty obvious. Not anywhere.
You just had one of those, or we talked about one of those in a recent episode. I think we made
That's
that
correct.
Case of I'm not sure this name's still kosher.
Yeah, one of my favorite drinks, actually, when you're out and really want to accelerate the party. But there's kind of a paramilitary reference to the British with the Irish that they do not like with Black and Tan. So they take it as a serious insult, and it's to be avoided. But that's your world traveler tip for the day.
There you go. Yeah, two guys stuck in the same place for a regrettable amount of time, still giving Ireland
years.
Yeah, years. Speaking of a global influence, watch this transition. You picked the song for today, and I fully approve.
I did. I've been listening to a lot of Harry Styles recently. My wife's been really into it, and she keeps playing it, and I keep finding myself thinking, this is really good. And so originally I'd chosen a different Harry Styles song because we were going to do a different topic. But of course, he's got a perfect song for this. Since we're going back to in-person testing, at least allowing it, the song, it's one of his more recent ones called As It Was, which I think is a killer tune. He's obviously an interesting guy. We've talked about him before, so I'm not going to belabor the point.
I'll restrain myself as well, although I am a Harry Styles fan.
How can you not be?
How could you not? Well, there you go.
On that note, Speaking of globality, let's talk about the LSAT world.
Let's do it. I feel like we've covered a lot of the test details, so let's just hit a couple of the freebies and special things that are out there that we're up to, because I really want to get into this in-person discussion. I know why people are listening to this. First thing, we talk about this each time, but as a reminder, we offer a lot of free webinars. We have several coming up. There's one here in just a couple of days, or at least within the next week. If you're new to the LSAT, do not miss this. It's the LSAT 101. This is on April 11th, the evening of April 11th. Get signed up for that. It'll teach you everything you need to know to get started with this test. A couple weeks after that, we've got one on basic conditional reasoning. That's going to cover both logical reasoning and logic games. So pretty cool. You get a lot of mileage out of that one. That's on the 26th of April. And then a couple of weeks after that, we cap it off with really the part 2, which is the advanced conditional reasoning. Again, focus more on logical reasoning in that one, but you also get some games rules as well. So people who struggle with logic games, particularly conditional rules, those are really useful in ways that I think sometimes surprise people.
That's exactly right. And that's actually a great run-up because you go LSAT 101 to basic to advanced.
Yeah.
You get a really kind of like generalized view and then narrowing in further and further on probably the most important LSAT concept that is out there, at least that's tested beyond like argumentation and generalized ideas like that. Conditional reasoning, all over logical reasoning, all over logic games, and even occasionally into reading comp as well. So a really useful concept. Speaking of useful concepts, talking about great transitions today.
Yeah, we're really paving this thing, man. This is smooth.
Yeah. Recently, we've talked a little bit about some of the discounts that we have induced the marketing team to kind of create and offer. And I always want to mention these because if you're thinking about taking a course or doing tutoring or some of these various things, there's some really cool things that are floating around out there. The first being that the 2023 LSAT Bibles contain access to an area that has a code that allows you to take the live online course. The on-demand course for the first month for just $1, which is hundreds of dollars off. So that's really cool. And then also there was in the most recent Crystal Ball, we did in fact offer a discount that ran out just at the end of March here, but they have instituted a new discount that is very similar to it that I believe is actually on our website at the moment, at least in some of the mailings. So if you're signed up for various kind of like webinar emails and so forth, you should be getting that as well. But I'm always about not paying full price and getting the discount. So if you can do it, I don't necessarily seek it, but when people are handing it to me, I'm like, I got to take it.
Yeah. And this is, like you said before, something we've kind of pushed for a long time. It's kind of cool to see this finally coming into actuality. It's nice to be able to promote these things with some money off for the, devoted people out there who listen to this.
Yeah, and I was talking to marketing, and they're like, you guys keep pushing us, but this is it. Once we get past this next one, which I think runs through part of April, maybe the middle of April, I don't know the exact date, because that's the kind of thing I wouldn't pay attention to. I don't think there's going to be another discount that comes up for months and months. So this has been an extraordinary period where we've been able to do this, but that is coming to an end. So as they say, act sooner as opposed to later. That said,
there you go.
Let's talk about some action that LSAC put in place where they acted sooner, and that is the return of the in-person testing option, although it's not quite the same as it was before.
No, it's not, but it is. You mentioned sooner. To me, this came a little sooner than I expected it to. I wasn't sure we were going to see anything like this year, frankly.
Yeah, I wasn't sure either. I think what happened was that, I knew they were going to do it at some point because they'd kind of like made noises to the effect of, we're thinking about it, we're considering it. And usually when they say things like that, it's probably going to happen. I also know that there is a segment of the population that is not well served by the at-home testing option. I personally love the at-home testing option. It saved the LSAT, more or less during the pandemic. But there's a number of people who have real issues with it, especially people who have multiple roommates or pets that are noisy, live in areas that don't have great Wi-Fi or internet, all these kinds of, there's a lot of people who don't love it. And this gives them an option that is, widely available. So let's do this. Let's talk a little bit about the background of what is happening, get up to speed with it, because there are changes from how they used to do it before. Then go through those details of how the test is, and then maybe talk about some of the pro cons of how this all works, what's good and what's bad, so that everyone here is at least up to speed on the options and understands what some of the benefits are and maybe understands the best decision for them. So you want to cover a little of the background, John?
Yeah. For basically ever since the early 90s, the LSAT was just paper and pencil at designated test centers. I'm sure it goes back pre-early 90s, but the modern era of the LSAT, as people know it now, the sections with games.
That's day one.
Right. It's always been this, but the test as we more or less conceive of it now existed paper and pencil at these designated centers. And they were centers sometimes on college campuses, sometimes at hotels, various places that LSAT contracted out to have people go. And they were on a single day. Sometimes on a Saturday, sometimes on other days. But that was it. That was your LSAT. So when people would talk about the February LSAT or the December LSAT, that's the day they were referring to at whatever test center they happened to register. Paper and pencil, 5 sections, very standard for a long time. And then, interestingly enough, pre-pandemic, just barely pre-pandemic, LSAC started messing around with a digital format. started thinking about doing some digital testing. And in mid-2019, they began to actually implement this. There's that now kind of infamous split test date in July of 2019, where half of the people who took it got given a tablet when they arrived to take their test and had to take it on this digital platform, digital hardware. The other half of people showed up and got the regular paper and pencil that they were used to. And essentially, it was a blind surprise. People didn't know going into it what their test center was going to be, tablet, paper. So that was how they introduced this. And that's pretty standard practice when it comes to trying to introduce a new test format. You don't want to do it all at once. You want to kind of split the crowd and see how things go and make A/B comparisons. After that, the rest of 2019 and into early 2020, they continued to run this exclusively on tablets. So you had this hardware. It was all centered on a Proctor hub that was in the room, but still in person, still at a test center. Not exactly absent of any issues, but that was the way it was running. And then, of course, the world collapsed. The pandemic hit.
Yeah, and just to kind of like insert a point here, the test centers, they weren't, fixed centers that LSAC ran year round. What they were places like your regular university. Like you go down to UCLA and there'd be a big lecture hall and everybody would show up and they would pass everything out. So, it sounds very formalized or fixed. This test center idea is different than what they're going to do with the upcoming tests. So I wanted to make that distinction. But what you're saying about, how they did it the way it used to work was, originally with paper tests, you'd all go to a university or maybe a conference center or a hotel and take the test paper. It was the same thing. It was just now, here's your tablet, and it was connected to this weird, LSAC hub that sometimes didn't work.
Yeah, there were a lot of issues.
Those are other podcasts.
I suppose if you went back to like the late 2019 podcast of the test recaps, you'll hear us talk about some of the issues with the tablets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then we had the pandemic kind of kick in early 2020.
That's right.
So we had a new thing.
Yeah, so they ran the first couple of tests of 2020 digitally with these tablets, the digital hardware as planned, but the pandemic just interrupted everything and became just inescapably problematic here. For in-person, get a bunch of people in the same room together at the same time kind of testing. And so what they did is they canceled a test or two. I can't remember if it was one or two tests in that like April window of 2020, and introduced in May of 2020 what they called the LSAT Flex. And this began now this 3-year stretch of at-home, or at least remote, testing that they've been doing. This is also where they changed the format from the old 4 sections that were scored plus an experimental, where you had double LRs that were scored, to, with the Flex, just 3 sections. No experimental, single game, single reading comp, single LR. Some people listening to this may have been around long enough to have taken one of those tests, but you'd need to be here for a couple of years, because the Flex ran from May 2020 up until August of 2021, and then they changed the format again. But this entire time that they were running these remote testing services, they had contracted the proctoring of it through a service called ProctorU. They still use this. We have talked at length about ProctorU. I can't begin to count how many times we've discussed ProctorU and the good and the bad, mostly the bad that has come along with it. But they use this, again, third-party proctoring service to monitor you on a webcam, whatever you have, so that you're basically filmed while you take the test at your house, or if you were to go someplace like a school campus or something and take it, or an office. And there you go. And that has taken us more or less up to today. As I said, in August 2021, they introduced what is the current version of the test, where they added an experimental section, dropped the name Flex, but it's still been exclusively at home or remote, no in-person options through right now.
Yeah, so that's your history there. And the first thing I'll note is this, is that format that we have with you take it at home in a 3 scored plus 1 experimental test format that is proctored by ProctorU, that's not going away.
Right.
That will persist. That will be one of the main options. I think the expectation of everybody involved is that will actually service the majority of test takers. One of the big questions here is exactly what percentage of people will use the in-person option. Nobody knows yet. But the expectation is the majority will continue to take it at home. You will still use ProctorU for that, and so on and so on. And it'll still be 3+1. So that LSAT that we've gotten used to in the last 2 years or so, nothing is changing about that. This is just a newly added option. So let's go through what it is that they are actually going to do and break down the details of it.
Yeah.
We'll pull some of this.
Oh, sorry, I was going to interject and just say as a point of interest for me, I'd be curious to know how many people listening to this right now feel like they've got their mind made up as to which of the two options they prefer and how they feel at the end of this conversation, if anything that we discuss changes their minds. Because I think it's entirely possible.
I can tell you I know what route that I'd take, but I'll disclose that at the end.
Let's cover that at the end because I have a feeling for myself as well.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the details that they shared about it, and then we'll get a little bit more. But from their messaging standpoint, the very first thing that they came out is that this starts in August of 2023. That is the first test of the new cycle. So they'll be keeping at-home testing with ProctorU, but now they're going to add the in-person option. But it's not the old test centers like at universities and so forth. They have contracted with Prometric. Prometric works with a bunch of different tests. And you go there and you show up and they check you in and they assign you to a computer and then you go sit down and you run through the whole process and take the test. So those LSAT centers, as we formerly knew them, they are gone.
Yeah.
And then we're not going to be seeing those again. It also means that the tablets that they gave out to everybody at the old test centers, that's not how they're doing this test. This will be done on Prometric machines, which to my knowledge are almost all, if not all, desktops.
Yeah. I believe that's right.
If you've ever been to a Prometric center, it looks like a little cube farm. There's like 8, 12, 16 little cubicles with computers on there. They're all numbered. You come in, you check in. They're like, you're at number 8, and then you go there.
It's got a little workspace with a camera kind of pointed down at you.
That's exactly right.
But it's very orderly. It's very organized. It's pre-approved, which we'll talk more about as we go. So, standard.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Anyone who's taken the GMAT or the GRE has experienced this.
That's entirely the case. It's very similar to these big, companies. Pearson VUE does the same type of thing where you go take these tests. They used to work with the GMAT, I think. And it's one of those scenarios where you're just another number, but there'll be people in there taking completely random tests along with the LSAT. Now, I'm sure when they open up these LSAT days, we'll see a higher percentage of people, especially in the bigger cities, who are all taking the LSAT. But it is entirely likely that you're going to have people taking professional licensure exams and other things around you. But it'll be a relatively quiet space. Not entirely, though, because you can't, count on the person next to you and what noise they'll make or whether they're going to shake their leg the whole time and, make the cubicle rock. But to schedule your time, ultimately, you'll use the Prometric tool, which allows you to pick a day and a time. The days will be limited to the days they're offering the LSAT. And those LSAT days will be, as listed on the website, typically Friday and Saturday. Sometimes it'll be one day only, though. Mm-hmm. Some of these tests will no longer be given over 2 days.
I think they've said that for the smaller administrations, right? Tests where maybe they don't have 20,000+ people signed up.
I think you're looking at like a February LSAT is a great example of a test that in the future will be just on one day. And that has pros and cons as well that we'll get into. If you initially sign up for the in-person test, you can actually add all the way up to 3 days beforehand, switch to remote testing or at-home testing. Once the window closes, though, for that in-person testing, you can't go back to it. So if you signed up initially for being at home and then you're like, I changed my mind, if the registration's already closed, you can't flip it back. You can only go one way. You can go online to in-person, but you won't be able to go backwards from in-person to online. So there'll be some rules about that. They posted a little bit of information on their website, but I got the clarification from their spokesperson earlier today. So just be aware of that. I think that might lead a lot of people to say, well, maybe I'll just sign up for in-person initially and then figure it out later. That's the safer choice, but I don't know that you need to worry about it. I think you can choose the one that you really want to do. Here's an interesting thing, though. Accommodated test takers, international test takers who have typically been pushed into the Tuesday after the main initial administration, that will no longer be the case. Paper and pencil tests will be administered at Prometric centers. International tests also at Prometric centers. So the tests will be given on the same days as the regular domestic test takers, whether that's both Friday and Saturday or just Friday or whatever the case may be, which compresses the testing window, John. Mm-hmm. Something that is of great interest to us is that ultimately what we'll be seeing here is we won't have 3 days of LSATs anymore. You'll have 1, maybe 2, depending on the test administration, and then everybody will be done. So that's the overview of what LSAC has kind of announced to people. Anything jump out at you there from all that?
The last point I think is maybe the most interesting is that international and paper testers are now going to be taking weekend tests, or at least Friday, Saturday tests, which is, to me, one of the biggest changes here. I'll be curious to see if that becomes something that's like required, if that becomes something that's more just suggested, or if it's simply an option that they leave available. I get the impression that it's required.
I believe that they're putting them all into the same kind of like window of time. I think that's actually being driven by test security. Having the students come to the Prometric Center on the same day is just a less of an issue. Same thing with international test takers. They're not taking it 3 days later. It's less of an issue. They get it all done. If you go back to the old days and you realize that LSATs were administered just on a single day and then it was over, this is returning to as close to that as they can actually get. It also means that the tests that they give over those 2 days are going to be not continuous. It's going to still move around the way it does right now, but they'll probably have to use fewer of those exams.
Yeah, when you say continuous, I think you mean like consistent. It won't be the same test Friday and Saturday, but there'll be fewer section changes, fewer varieties and variabilities between content. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. That's exactly what I mean. Is like they were always worried about the Saturday and Sunday test takers disclosing information to someone who took the test later, and then there being a compromise from that. And they didn't want that to be the case. Well, this addresses that. And in doing so, it allows them to use fewer test forms. You don't have to necessarily use entirely different tests on that Tuesday now, because there is no more Tuesday. It's all Friday and Saturday. And if it's a single day, I would imagine that we'll see one test form in the morning and then maybe a second test form in the afternoon, and then they'll be done with it.
Yeah.
So this it allows them to save questions going forward. They won't have to use as many test forms. People who've listened to our test recaps for years know that there are LSATs out there where there were 40 or 50 different possibilities. And they've been bringing that down slowly but steadily for the last couple of years. Now, I don't see that they'll be using more than 2, maybe 3 test forms over the course of 2 days, but even that would surprise me.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. So it's to their benefit, obviously. I think it helps test security in general. And look, just speaking a little selfishly, it's to our benefit too. God, it's hard to track 40 different combinations. There's 4 reading comps in play and stuff. If there's only 2 reading comps in a single game and maybe 2 LRs floating around out there, that really helps us as well and keeps our messaging post-test a lot clearer for people. So I see a lot of upsides to this.
And you've also seen people who've taken the test early on get worried that people who are taking it later had an advantage.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to talk about, my test because I think someone who takes it tomorrow might get an advantage. That is going to disappear, or at least be limited even more so. So I think it kind of like eases the mind for those earlier test takers, like no one else is getting an advantage. It levels that particular playing field.
I'm tempted to make a promise here. Tempted. And if I shouldn't make this promise, we can cut this part out. The one thing we never do in podcasts, which is post-edit, we can trim this. It probably means for you Friday and Saturday people that we're going to be able to release our test recaps a few days earlier than normal, because we may not have to wait for the Tuesday people to finish before we're able to actually talk about the tests. So it could be that we're doing Sunday recording or Monday recording as opposed to like Tuesday, Wednesday.
Yeah, that's not a promise. That's a prediction.
Oh, fair enough. I know I'm going to get somebody calling me back on it when we do record one on a Wednesday anyway. And they're like, but you said.
Yeah, well, what I'm more worried about is you talking about recording on a Sunday. I'm like, no, I don't want to do that.
Fair
I don't want to work on any weekend anyway. Already working on Saturdays is enough.
Fair enough. But this would probably let us get it out on like a Monday or Tuesday versus Wednesday, Thursday. So people who take the test over the weekend wouldn't have to wait quite as long. Like I say, I don't want to make any guarantees on that, but it does seem likely.
I think you actually make a really good point there with that. And speaking of kind of like these other points, one of the things I did want to mention about like when you get to the test center and you're taking the test, you'll still be taking it on Law Hub. Mm-hmm. So the experience, whether you are in person or at home, will be the same. You'll still be using the same interface. It won't be different. Like I said before, it's not on a tablet. It'll still be on a desktop that Prometric has. So you're going to see that essentially the experience should be the same, except for one big difference to me, and this one's an important one that will come up a little bit later, is that whereas ProctorU has a live proctor who's watching you and, as we know, can interfere with your testing, that is not how Prometric works. They won't have an online proctor. They actually have people in the center. So when you get there, part of the Prometric experience is, all right, you're going to be quiet, you're going to go through this, but there's somebody there physically watching you. That's the person who's proctoring the test who can actually stop you from, doing something that you shouldn't. But that also means that the Prometric proctor isn't going to take control of your mouse, isn't going to say, excuse me, I can't see your face, or any of the stupid things that we hear ProctorU proctors actually doing. Or the singing that you hear sometimes in the background, or the changing of proctors, or just all the ridiculous stuff that we have heard over time. I will say that that is a big positive to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Having taken tests in these Prometric type of centers, the GRE and the GMAT personally, I can tell you there's a person when I did it that's essentially like a desk clerk. So you go in, there's like a little check-in room that's kind of anterior to the room where you take the test and the cube farm that you mentioned. And they check your ID and they scan you and they take a picture and they send you in. They give you anything that you're supposed to have and make sure you don't take anything that you're not. And then for the breaks and stuff, you come out and go through the same procedure with that single person sitting there, basically like a hall monitor or a desk clerk.
Yeah,
but it's really low key. It's definitely not the kind of like heavy-handedness that ProctorU is occasionally guilty of.
Yeah, the bar that they have for like little violations is so low, like anything can cross it and cause an issue, and they want to jump in. I don't think you'll see that same problem because they'll be able to have eyes on you. You don't have to worry about it. I imagine a lot of the pre-test run-up will be a little bit more streamlined. Now, the test registration for all these exams opens up in mid-May. And one of the things you'll see if you're thinking about in person is the various Prometric options are going to be limited to their test centers. They're not going to do pop-up test centers. There's no LSAC test center. This is all Prometric. They make a big point of saying they've got 4,000 test centers in 180 countries. In the U.S., they've got test centers in all 50 states. That doesn't mean it's going to be close to everybody.
Right.
And that's where if you're in the middle of Idaho and they don't have a Prometric center that's, within 200 miles of you, well, then maybe you have the choice of either driving to that center and staying the night or day or what have you, or taking it at home. And this is where they feel like they're now getting full geographic coverage. No matter where you are in the world, you should be able to take the LSAT. Many of you will have the option of taking it in person. And if you're in a major metropolitan area, you're going to see more Prometric centers around. It won't just be a single one there. I will say that some of the options that they previously made available to people, where they'd give you a voucher for a hotel room, where they would give you a loaner device. Those programs are all being discontinued.
Right.
There's not going to be that anymore. They don't need them because they'll just be like, go to the Prometric Center. You don't need a hotel, or at least they don't need to pay for your hotel. I'm sure some people will still go to a hotel. Interestingly enough, when it comes to the LSAT writing, that will not be offered at Prometric. That is only at home. So some portion of this test, and the least important, I think we'd all argue, will still be done at home or in the remote kind of scenario. And as far as fees, let's just say, because it'll come up again in a few minutes.
Of course.
The fee will be the same, as I understand it, for both at home and in person. So they're agnostic as to which platform you choose from a fee standpoint. More to come on that in a moment.
Yeah, I was going to say, however, but full pause. We'll get to it.
Yeah, and just the last note on those Prometric centers is the international test takers should hopefully, I don't have final confirmation on this, but I think it's expected to operate this way. They should see some better hours. International test takers have suffered with the hours of availability because LSAC kind of restricted it inside a window that they could service. So sometimes you had international test takers taking the test in, really the middle of the night for them,
right.
Especially in Asia. We should see the Prometric center hours be the available hours, which will kind of turn it back into, I don't know what the typical hours are, maybe 8 a.m. to 6 or something like that, whenever Prometric is open. So a little bit more standard. That hopefully should be a benefit here for international test takers. So you can see that overall adding this option addresses a lot of issues and concerns that they had. Certainly gives a number of students a welcome opportunity to kind of eliminate problems that they were thinking they were going to have to experience, like their loud roommate who never shuts up or is
Right.
always playing Led Zeppelin, that kind of thing. So overall, I'd say this is a really positive thing that they're doing. They did complain about it costing a little bit more. They say that right in the announcement that it, is more expensive. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. Choice tends to be a good thing for consumers. So that's what we're seeing here. Let's do this. Since we're talking like pros and cons, let's just run down a list of some that we feel. I think the majority of these are going to tilt pro, but this is not all upside.
No, well, the first one that I would throw out there is the one I was just saying, is that the more choices of venues and options that you have, that's always a good thing. It gives people something that matches whatever they prefer. And it doesn't matter what your reason is, noise, whether you've got bad internet, whether you just don't want to be distracted, or whether you just want to kind of get out of your home comfort zone. This gives you a different option. I think that's a big pro right there.
Yeah, I agree. Let's go a con. And I hope this doesn't become the trend where I'm all the negatives and you're all the positives.
Looks that way,
Yeah, probably will. One con is that more tests are going to be one day only, frankly, which gives fewer choices for testing options, for sign-up options, especially if this turns into a Friday exclusive for smaller tests. I could see that actually causing a lot of problems for people. That's less to do, I think, with the at-home versus in-person, and more to do just with what we see on the horizon for them maybe reducing the testing window for smaller tests.
Yeah, two things. I agree it's a con. We have said before that if it's Friday only, we talked about this in a podcast before, that is unfair. It should be Saturday only if it's going to be anything. And if someone's like, well, why would they be able to do one day only? It's because they're, splitting up the burden a little bit in terms of like some people are in person, some people are at home. Part of the issue with all these tests was that there's ProctorU's getting overburdened.
Yeah.
Which will ultimately turn into kind of a pro, I think, when we get to it. But I will say that there's kind of a pro inside having just a single day. That means there are fewer test forms. For us, that means it's easier to track the content. And I think students would say, well, what difference does that make to me? The difference is that it allows us to be even more knowledgeable when we do our podcast after each test, where we recap what was there. It also helps us to make sure that the predictions that we're making for scales, the fewer predictions we have to make, the more accurate they can be. We spend more time on it. We are able to cross-check it a little bit more. The fewer forms out there, there's going to be forms that we know a tremendous amount about and can be absolutely certain as to what we're looking at with this. So I think that's a pro right there. It's just easier for us to track the content.
Yeah, but if you've only got one day to take this, that day's a Friday, and you're someone who does, in fact, need to do this at a Prometric center, it can be quite burdensome trying to find time off at work. It can be expensive to try to go and figure out how you're going to take a day and spend it down taking this test. Getting a choice of when to take it. There may be fewer choices at a single center near you. In fact, there almost certainly would be over the course of just one day than there would be on ProctorU, which is digital and sort of global in a way. Mm-hmm. There's only so many physical cubicles at the Prometric Center down the street.
No, if you're working, the thought of having to take 4 hours vacation or sick time to go take the LSAT, I mean, that would make me sick. So I wouldn't like it.
So I can see the in-person single-day test being a bit of a logistical issue. So there's con number one, potentially.
Yeah, although as you just said, the pro inside this is that if you're splitting people off from ProctorU, there's less of a burden on them. And we have seen that systemically they struggle at times, especially with some of the larger administrations. So what you're doing is you're splitting off a stream of people in person to deal with Prometric, which should be an easier experience. And that's less pressure on ProctorU. Maybe, hopefully, that leads to fewer errors by their proctors or fewer problems. I would consider that a huge pro if it turned out that way. I just don't know if it's necessarily the case that that's going to happen.
Yeah, what we've seen with ProctorU in terms of issues have tended to be either systemic, where they do seem to be overwhelmed. Their whole system crashes, that they just can't get proctors assigned to the people that are meant to be testing, or very individualized, where one proctor just screws something up or doesn't know what's going on. The systemic ones are typically more concerning, maybe not for individuals, but they certainly affect way more people. I think this is going to cut down on that a lot.
Yeah, and since we're in the the Proctor U vein, let's just continue on with the next one. I would say that is a pro.
Okay.
Is that this gives you the ability to get away from Proctor U interference. There's no Prometric proctor who's going to take control of your mouse. I said this one before. I think this one's huge, and to me is a real attractive thing. It is one less variable in the testing experience. And I've talked to enough students who were like, I was crushing it, just doing great. And then, the proctor said all of a sudden they couldn't see my face and took control for the last 2 minutes. And they're like, well, I'll still keep my score though, because, I felt like I was doing really well. I'm like, that 2 minutes could have been 2 more points. I hate that. I don't like that kind of variability. It's one of the things that's always bothered me about Proctor U. So the fact that we now have an option where we don't have to deal with them and someone doesn't have that ability, that is a really good thing. And the Prometric cubicles are set up for testing.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it's the most comfortable chair in the world, but it is built around the idea of we're here to do tests, show up and take your test.
Yeah, they're pre-approved. They're sort of made ready to go for this. So you just show up and get to work. You're not going to have connectivity issues. You're not going to have proctor interruptions, as you say. There's nothing to do with the room. There won't be security violations. So all of those concerns and really all of the tragedy that we tend to hear when a proctor does wreck someone's test day unnecessarily, that's not going to happen when you go to one of these test centers and do this in person.
Here's kind of a con with these Prometric centers, though.
You're going to do it? You're not making me do it?
Awesome. Go. I'm going to do this con. Is that if you think about it, you now are, at home you have control. All right, I want my temperature at 67 degrees or whatever it is that you want it at. At Prometric, you don't have that ability. So we go back to the old thing where all of a sudden we're going to start advising people to dress in layers. You don't know if it's going to be hot or cold. What if the AC broke? What if the place is just like a freezer? So you won't have complete control over your testing environment. You'll also have other people around you. If somebody's in there coughing constantly, any one of us these days would be like, stop coughing.
Right.
Number 2, don't make me sick. And number 3, shut up, I'm trying to take a test. All these things go through your mind as to things that are annoying you about other people being around you during a testing environment scenario that you won't be able to control. So there's some new elements that are introduced, but I would take those personally over the Proctor U variability, which is, all the way from perfect to horrendous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect to impossible. There was, I recall this pretty distinctly going in, taking, I guess it was the GRE, where people were constantly coming in and out of the room because, as you mentioned, different tests are being administered while you're there. And with the LSAT, because you can sign up every 20 minutes, even if it was a room full of LSAT people, every 20 minutes, somebody could be coming, going, getting a break, taking their, 10 minutes between sections 2 and 3. So there is a lot of kind of background traffic going on in these rooms, especially some of the larger ones that might have 20 desks. That is a potential con of Prometric. You're not going to be the only one in the room. You're not going to have a perfect, static environment the whole time.
It won't be 35 minutes where everybody's silently working.
No.
Somebody's raising their hand. I got a question. How do I get this thing working? My screen's glitching. There's always somebody.
Yep.
But again, you take the test and you have it work itself all the way through. One of the things that you end up with is there may not be this disclosure of information that aids these later test takers. There's a real mix of pluses and minuses as we go through this. Without that Tuesday testing, now you're not helping future people accidentally or unintentionally, which has been a very legitimate concern that people have had. It's the reason that we always delayed our podcast until after the Tuesday test takers were done, because we didn't want to prejudicially release information that somehow gave people an advantage. Now we won't have to actually deal with that. So the con or the pro here is that not only do you avoid that, maybe we get our podcast out earlier that reviews all of it, and it's just faster to the point of knowing more about your test.
Yeah. There's one final con that we've alluded to. I don't know if we meant to save it for last, but here we are, which is LSAC has already announced that this costs them more. The reason I suspect that they're announcing that is because they're going to increase the price of the test.
Yes, what they said, just to quote it, was offering students a choice between online testing and in-person testing is more complex and more expensive for LSAC. That to me was code for there's a price increase coming. And you and I actually debated this before and put an over-under on the price increase. John, what was your number that you think the new price will be?
So it's $215 now. I guessed 230. And in thinking about it and seeing the way that they've increased the prices here, I think I probably went too high. But I said it. You heard me say it. So I'll stick with 230. What's your guess?
Well, when we were talking about this before, I said 225, and now I'm concerned it's too low.
Right. And I'm concerned I'm too high. So that's a good bet, right? Neither one of us feels like we've absolutely slam dunked on the other.
I was like, no, they're not going to do it 15. Jon, you're crazy. And then I started thinking about it. All right, new kind of testing option that will be more expensive going through Prometric. And then I was like, inflation in the last year was like 6%. I wonder if they use this to be like, sorry, it's a $15 shot. Do I think it'll be 20? No.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
But, 227.50 is like the over-under, and man, I don't know which one to take. It's right in there.
Well, if that's the over, it won't be a push. So,
for what it's worth, when they announce the registration opening in mid-May, that is when the price would increase.
Yeah.
Right now, you can't register for this test in August or later. That doesn't open until mid-May of this year. So we're coming up in, probably 5-6 weeks. That's when we will know what they do with the price increase, and we'll see how close we were in predicting their rapaciousness.
Let's hope we're both wrong and it stays the same and they just kind of bite this bullet.
$100 says that doesn't happen.
No bet.
I knew you wouldn't take it.
No.
You're no fool.
No. And neither are they.
So, Jon.
So, yeah, they're not going to sit there and just eat a price hike on their end and not find a way to distribute it.
No, and not with inflation either. Everybody's very happy to pass along inflationary costs. But that brings me to my last question, Jon, and we kind of alluded to it earlier. Mm-hmm. Given the opportunity to retake this test, which would you choose? Would you do it at home or would you do it in person?
Me personally, I'm still leaning pretty strongly to taking it at home. I'm a big fan of controlling my own environment, but I'm also in a situation that's somewhat unique compared to the typical test taker in that I live alone. I don't have parents or roommates or significant others or rowdy pets. I can control the temperature. I know where the bathrooms are. I can set everything up exactly the way that I want. That to me offers greater security or predictability, I think, despite the fact that I am dealing with the unpredictability of ProctorU. But, and here's the one maybe asterisk I would put on this, and my internet's fantastic too, so I don't have to worry about like connectivity issues and stuff. The one asterisk or footnote I would put on this is I'd very likely pre-test both options. I would go and take a couple of practice tests in some sort of remote cubicle-like environment. Maybe it's at a library or something. And I would take some practice tests set up here at my house, the way that I would want to on test day, and see if there's a psychological impact. Do I concentrate better? Or does the fact that people might be moving around in that campus library affect me? I'd want to try to get some kind of like tangible comparison in place to make this a bit more of an objective choice as opposed to just like, I feel like I'd be more comfortable or do better. I think this is something that's testable enough. You don't have to go on gut. You could actually go on result.
I like your plan. I would make a different choice. I would take it in person. And it's not so much that I feel the need to test, which one I would do better at. I feel comfortable that I could do reasonably well with each one. It's that I want to reduce possible issues that are catastrophic. And to me, ProctorU is a catastrophe waiting to happen. I have a healthy, not fear of them, but concern and suspicion over one of their proctors not realizing how important this test is and intervening and messing things up. So, and I also feel like sometimes taking things at home is a little bit too relaxing.
Yeah.
I need the edge of being in that more professionalized environment where I feel like it's high stakes. For some people, it's a terrible thing. They don't want it. They're much better at home. For me, I like having a little bit of that edge where I can look at it and be like, okay, it's showtime. I've always felt that way. I like it when I know there's a little bit of pressure. I perform better when I know that there's kind of like, it has that kind of much more formalized atmosphere as opposed to a casual atmosphere, which is definitely what I would get at home. I'd be like looking at stuff and being like, I got to fix that or whatever. I don't need those distractions. I just need to focus on the test. I think that would be better done at Prometric.
Yeah, and
There.
hearing you run through that last bit about distractions, and now I'm looking around where I would probably be taking the test, and there's 50 books I want to read and 10 guitars on the walls and putting green over there. Like, yeah, I might have a hard time concentrating here now that I think about it.
I think these are the types of questions, though, that, it's all individualized. If you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know which one I would do, think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I love your suggestion of go down and take a few tests, use our, analytics testing interface or a course interface or Law Hub or something, and be like, you can take tests in both environments and ask yourself, how does it feel? Does it feel weird to go to the library and take a test? You're sitting at one of those little carols and you've got your laptop set up and you're doing it. Or does it feel like, okay, this is good. I'm out of my comfort zone and that's making me a little bit more alert. That's kind of how I feel about those environments, is when I'm out of my comfort zone, my awareness goes to high level. And that's what I want during one of these types of tests. So I think it's really just a matter of what works for each person. Test it out. I think that's a great idea. But either way, you'll be getting the same LSAT. That's the most important thing. Don't think that the at-home tests are easier or harder. They should be the same test. You will have people coming out of each experience and saying, oh, I had those logic games. I had those logic games too. In fact, we had the same exact test. They're doing this in part to help them with that kind of test-making problem that has been growing for years, that we've been capitalizing with the crystal ball and test predictions and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Well, there you
Anything
go.
else to add, Jon?
Nothing, except it's nice to be able to report on some good news, and I consider this to be good news.
That's right. And the next time we do a podcast, we should be talking about scholarship reconsideration. That's what our next topic is that we're interested in talking about, which for many people is about to be a very big issue if you're in the admissions cycle. So that should be interesting when we get to it. And then we've got the April LSAC coming up here really soon, like a week and a half.
Yep. And then we've got U.S. news rankings. So the hits keep coming, man. It's going to be a busy month or so of podcasts.
This will be a busy month. So on that note, if you get a chance to subscribe to this podcast, you can find it on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere else in the world. If you've enjoyed it, please leave a comment or a rating as well. And if you have any questions about this episode in particular, or about LSAT or admissions questions in general, you can send those to lsatpodcast@powerscore.com. On behalf of Jon and myself, stay safe out there. We'll talk to you soon.